Picture it. A cave in the dead of winter 17,000 years ago. Outside, snow and a wind that never stops. Bare trees, frozen ground, a white world with nothing living in it. Inside, a small fire, a handful of people wrapped in furs, and a hunger that has gone on for far too long. The hunts have failed. The traps are empty. The last of the stored food is gone. The children have stopped crying, which is somehow worse than the crying. And lying near the back of the cave is the body of someone who did not make it through the night. Someone they knew. Someone they had loved. And the living look at the dead. And they are so hungry. Nobody in that cave is a villain. There is no cruelty here, no madness. Only a mother watching her children fade. A body that is no longer quite a person, and a choice that no human being should ever have to make. Whatever they decide, they will carry it in silence for the rest of their lives. And they are far from the first to face it. They will be very, very far from the last. You already know where this is going, and every part of you wants to look away from it. But stay with me. Because what happened in caves like that one is not some rare horror at the very edge of the human story. It is sitting right at the center of it. For hundreds of thousands of years, in every corner of the world, human beings ate other human beings. Your ancestors did it, and we can prove it. Not from legends, not from rumors, but from the marks their stone tools left, cut deep into human bone. So the real question is not the one you think it is. It is not, did ancient humans eat each other? They did, everywhere, for an almost unimaginably long time. The real question, the strange and uncomfortable and genuinely fascinating one, is this. Why did they do it, when so often they were not even starving? And when and how did we finally stop? This is the story of the oldest taboo. And to tell it, we have to learn to read the bones. Because bones remember everything. When an archaeologist digs up an ancient animal that was killed for food, a deer, a wild horse, a bison, the bones carry a very particular signature. There are cut marks, thin, straight scratches, where a sharp stone blade sliced the muscle away from the bone. There are chop marks at the joints, where the body was taken apart. There are long bones snapped clean in half and scraped hollow, because inside them is marrow, one of the richest, fattiest foods in the entire prehistoric world. And here and there, tooth marks, where someone gnawed the last shreds of meat away. Now here is the thing that stops researchers cold. On human bones, from sites scattered all over the planet, they find the exact same marks. The same cut lines, in the same places, made by the same tools. The same skulls broken open. The same thigh bones cracked for their marrow. The same human teeth, leaving the same marks on human bone. A human body butchered exactly like a deer, taken apart, stripped, processed for every last calorie by people who knew precisely what they were doing. When you find that, there is no gentle way to read it. This person was eaten. And archaeologists are careful here, almost obsessively so, because bones can be marked by many things. By burial rites, by scavenging animals, by simple time and decay. So they look for the whole pattern, the one that can only mean a single thing. Cut marks exactly where a butcher cuts to strip the muscle. Bones broken open in the one specific way you break them to reach the marrow, and never otherwise. The dents of human teeth. Human bones tossed in with the kitchen waste, burned in the same hearths, cracked with the same stones as the deer and the horses. When every piece of it lines up together, on skeleton after skeleton after skeleton, the conclusion becomes impossible to escape. And once you learn to see it, you start to find it everywhere. In a place called Gough's Cave in England from around 15,000 years ago, The floor was littered with human bones treated in exactly the same way as the animal bones lying beside them. Cut, cracked, chewed, and tossed aside. But that sight holds something even stranger. Several of the human skulls had been carefully, skillfully worked. The faces struck off, the base broken away, the ragged edges trimmed smooth, and shaped into cups, drinking cups, made out of human heads. This was not the chaos of starvation. This was slow and deliberate and skilled. Somebody sat down and took their time. Travel back further, and it only gets deeper. In the caves of Atapuerca, in northern Spain, there are human bones marked with cut lines that are not 15,000 years old, but around 800,000 years old. They were butchered by a human species that lived and died long before our own even existed. They ate one another. They seemed to have especially eaten children. And they threw the leftover human bones into the same pile as the animal scraps, as though there were simply no difference between the two. 800,000 years. Cannibalism is not a dark little chapter in the human story. It is one of the very first pages in the book, and it was never only us. The Neanderthals, our famous cousins, did it too. At a cave called El Cedron, in Spain, archaeologists found the remains of an entire Neanderthal group, men, women, and children, a whole extended family. And every one of them bore the marks, cut, dismembered, their bones cracked open for marrow, their skulls broken into. A family, eaten in a single event 50,000 years ago. Whatever line you imagine separates us from the eating of our own kind. The Neanderthals stood on exactly the same side of it as we did. And it did not stop when the Ice Age ended. At a site called Herxheim, in what is now Germany, from a settled farming community of around 7,000 years ago, archaeologists uncovered the shattered remains of hundreds of people, men, women, children, even the unborn. Their bones smashed, their flesh stripped away, their skulls once again carefully worked into cups. Hundreds of them gathered in one place. Whatever was happening at Herxheim, on a scale like that, it was not one desperate winter. It was a practice, organized, repeated, and completely ordinary to the people who carried it out. So the evidence is overwhelming, and it is ancient, and it is global. Which brings us to the part that people find almost impossible to accept. Because when you look closely at all these sites, a very strange truth begins to emerge. A huge amount of this, quite possibly most of it, had nothing to do with hunger at all. To understand that, you have to know that cannibalism is not one single thing. It is at least three. The first, and the one you have been picturing this whole time, is survival cannibalism. The winter cave, the failed hunt, the famine that grinds on and on until there is simply no other food left anywhere on earth, except the body of someone who has already died. This one needs no cultural explanation, no ritual, no belief. It is written into every living animal. The raw drive to survive, pushed past the point where anything else in the world still matters. And it has never truly left us. Read the accounts of the worst famines in recorded history, of ships lost for months at sea, of wagon trains and expeditions trapped in the deep snow of a mountain pass, and you find the same thing again and again. Ordinary, decent people who crossed the line, because the only thing waiting on the other side of it was their own death. In the siege of a starving city, in a lifeboat, in a plane down in the mountains. Starvation does not care about your taboo. Given enough time and enough hunger, it will quietly erase it in almost anyone. But survival is only one of the three, and it may well be the smallest. The second kind is the one that truly unsettles people, because it has nothing to do with hunger and everything to do with love. It is cannibalism as ritual, as a part of how an entire culture cares for its own dead. Anthropologists call it endocannibalism, the eating of members of your own group. And astonishingly, again and again, it turns out to be an act of devotion. We know this for certain, because in a few remote places it survived right up into modern times, where we could actually watch it and ask the people why. In the highlands of Papua New Guinea, a people called the Fora had a funeral custom that stunned the outside world when doctors first encountered it in the 20th century. When a person died, their body was not buried, and it was not burned. It was mourned. And then it was carefully, respectfully eaten by the very people who had loved them most. To be left to rot alone in the cold ground, or to be eaten by worms and maggots, was seen as a far worse, far lonelier fate than to be taken lovingly back into the living bodies of your own family. Eating the dead was not an act of horror to them. It was the deepest act of grief they had. It was how you refused to let someone go. There were rules, even here. The men most often took the muscle. It was the women and the children who were given the brain and the softer organs. A small detail that, as we are about to see, would turn out to matter in the most horrifying way. But the feeling behind it was never cruelty. When outsiders first asked the Foray how they could possibly do such a thing, the Foray were often just as bewildered right back, genuinely horrified that other people would abandon the ones they loved to the worms and the cold, empty ground, instead of keeping them safe and close. And when researchers look again at ancient sites like Gough's cave, at those patient, careful, unhurried skull cups, many of them now believe they are looking at something exactly like this. Not a desperate band devouring a stranger, but a grieving community performing a slow, meaningful, sacred rite over its own beloved dead. The horror you and I feel, staring at those worked bones, may be the precise opposite of what the people who made them felt. To them, it may have been the most tender and loving thing they knew how to do. The third kind sits at the far opposite extreme. It is exocannibalism, the eating of people from outside your group. Enemies, the defeated, prisoners of war. This is cannibalism as power, as terror, as the ultimate statement of victory over another human being. We did not merely kill you. We consumed you. And now you are gone. And we remain. In many cultures, a warrior would eat a piece of a fallen enemy to take in his strength, his courage, his spirit, his very self. Where the funeral custom was about holding your own people close, this was about erasing someone else completely. The most total way one group of humans has ever devised to defeat another. Love and survival and conquest. Three utterly different reasons, one single act, running like a dark red thread all the way through the human story. And here is the fact that proves, beyond any argument, just how common this once must have been. Because it is not only written in the bones and the caves, it is written inside you, deep in your DNA, in the gene that builds a particular protein inside your brain. Most human beings carry a specific protective variation. For a long time, nobody could work out why it was there, or why it was scattered through human populations on every continent on Earth. And then researchers finally understood what it defends against. It defends against a very specific, very rare kind of disease, the kind you can only catch by eating human brains, because cannibalism carries a hidden, horrifying cost. When you eat the nervous tissue of another person, and above all, the brain, you can catch something that is not a normal infection at all, not a bacterium, not a virus, a twisted, misshapen protein called a prion, which quietly, patiently turns your own brain to sponge over months and years, and which always, without exception, kills you. Among the four people, this disease had a name. They called it Kuru, the laughing death, because of the strange, helpless smile it dragged onto the faces of the dying as their brains came apart. It moved through them as a slow epidemic, striking hardest at the women and the children who were given the brains to eat. And it did not begin to fade until the funeral feasts themselves finally stopped. And that protective gene, the one sitting quietly in your DNA at this very moment, appears to be our whole species' ancient scar from precisely this. A genetic defense that spread through humanity because at some point deep in our past, so many of our ancestors were eating each other and dying of it that merely surviving the practice reshaped our genome from the inside. You are, in a very literal sense, descended from the cannibals who happened to be resistant enough to live. Your own body is a monument to how ordinary this all once was. Think about that the next time you feel the instant, total revulsion this subject stirs up in you. That revulsion feels like the oldest and most natural thing in the world. A bright, clean line drawn by nature herself. But your disgust is not proof that your ancestors shared it. In fact, the quiet gene hidden just beneath that disgust is proof of the opposite, that for a very, very long stretch of our story, they did not. So if it was everywhere and ancient and woven into our grief and our wars and even our genes, then the real mystery turns completely inside out. The question was never really why we ever did it. The question is, how on earth did we ever manage to stop? And the answer, like so much of the human story, begins with the one thing that changed everything: food. For almost all of our existence, real hunger was never more than a bad season away. A run of failed hunts, a drought, one hard winter too many. And survival cannibalism was always there, waiting, as the last door at the end of the hall. But then, around 12,000 years ago, humans learned to farm. They planted grain and stored it in granaries. They raised herds of animals they could eat whenever they needed to. For the very first time, the fat of a good year could be saved against the hunger of a bad one. The famines never fully vanished. But that last, desperate door was reached far, far less often, because now there was so much more food standing between a person and total starvation. Then came the second force, the taboo itself, slowly hardening into something absolute. As small, wandering bands grew into settled villages and villages into towns and cities and kingdoms, human societies built stronger and stronger rules around the dead. How a body must be buried, honored, mourned, and kept firmly apart from the world of the living. Great religions rose that made the human body sacred, and the eating of it the deepest imaginable horror. The dead were given graves and tombs and rituals, and a fixed place on the far side of a line the living were absolutely forbidden to cross. Eating them stopped being a way to grieve and became the ultimate crime and the ultimate sin. And somewhere in there, quietly, we may also have been learning from the disease itself, from the difference between the villages that ate their dead and were slowly hollowed out by the laughing death and the villages that buried them and were not. Whether anyone ever understood the true cause or not, the ones who stopped tended to survive and grow. The taboo and the biology were pushing all along in the very same direction. Farming and religion and law and a plague hidden inside the act itself. Slowly, across thousands of years, they swung shut the oldest door in human history, until eating another person went from a thing ordinary people simply did in grief or in hunger or in triumph, to the single most unthinkable act you can imagine. But here is the last and most uncomfortable truth of all. And it is the reason this story is not really about the distant past at all. We did not evolve out of cannibalism. We did not quietly become some different, gentler kind of creature. The capacity is still fully in us, every part of it. We simply built a world so overflowing with food and so firm in its rules that we almost never have to walk down that hallway anymore. Almost. Because whenever that world breaks down, in the worst sieges, the cruelest famines, the disasters where the food runs out completely and there is truly nothing else left, human beings, ordinary human beings, still cross the line. Not because they are monsters, because they are exactly what they have always been. The taboo that feels so total, so permanent, so deeply a part of what it means to be human, turns out to be surprisingly thin and surprisingly new. And underneath it lies a much older, much deeper story. One written in 800,000-year-old bones, and in careful skull cups, and in the quiet, protective genes sitting in your own blood right now. The people in that winter cave were not some other species. They loved their dead the way you love yours. They feared starvation the way you would. And when every other option was finally gone, they did the thing that human beings have done in the dark for as long as there have been human beings at all. We stopped, mostly, only once we had finally built a world where we could afford to. And the strangest thought of all is this. The line between us and them is not made of a better nature, or a purer heart, or a cleaner soul. It is made of a full plate, and a firm rule, and a little bit of luck. And any of those three, history keeps quietly reminding us, can always be taken away.